Zoom with it, but we don't know what Zoom's doing with it. Welcome, everybody. This is Mahadeli from the Center for Learning and Teaching at the American University in Cairo, and also the co-facilitator of Equity Unbound. And together we're offering this session. I will not give long introductions for Carolyn, Shaun, and Paul, and I will not give a long introduction about this talk. I will just say that meeting you guys, listening to your work, reading your work, interacting with you has inspired me in the way I think about academic integrity in ways that like nobody has ever inspired me before. So thank you for joining us all the way from Canada. And I will let you guys introduce yourselves and your roles. I know your roles sometimes shift and things like that. So Carolyn is someone, especially, I know all three of them work on this together, but I always associate it with her. And I will let you guys introduce yourselves and get us started. Thank you in advance.
Thank you for
thank you very much. So I will start with my own introduction, and then I'll pass it on to Carolyn and Paul. My name is Shaun Longstreet. I'm the Dean of Innovation and Teaching and Learning here at the College of the Rockies. I have been here for 4 years now. I was born in Edmonton, Alberta, which we call Treaty 6 from the Indigenous perspective, and greatly honored to be here, and thank you. Carolyn.
Great. Tanshe Kiwao, Carolyn Ives Dashini Kashan, Wag to Wag Tuck, Carolyn Ives and Squest. I'm Carolyn Ives. I'm a faculty member, a coordinator for learning and faculty development in our Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching at Thompson Rivers University. I used to be an English prof before that. I'm of Métis and European settler descent from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan in Treaty 6 territory, which is the traditional lands of many diverse First Nations. The area I'm from is primarily Métis and Cree. And I'm really grateful to be an uninvited guest working and living in Tecumseh-Secwepemc in beautiful Kamloops, BC. And I'm really grateful that you're here, and I'm grateful to be meeting you all. So, so welcome. Paul.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for having us. My name is Paul Martin. I'm the Dean of Teaching and Learning Innovations at Okanagan College, which is in Kelowna, British Columbia in Canada. And I also was born and raised in Edmonton, a Treaty 6 territory, and I'm grateful to live and work here. And again, thank you to everybody for introducing yourselves in the chat and for letting us know where you were joining us from. So we've got a great group from all over the world here. So excited to join you this morning.
Great. Can everyone see the screen? Okay, perfect.
Right. So as is tradition, when we start our sessions here in Canada, we do land acknowledgements to center ourselves in the work that we do and to keep in mind the history and the context of where we live and work. And so I would like to express my gratitude to the Ktunaxa people whose unceded ancestral lands this college is set on. The College of the Rockies serves the communities of the East Kootenays. All of the college's campuses are located on the traditional territory of the Ktunaxa people, which is also home to the Kinbasket people. There are 5 First Nation bands located in the regional boundaries of our college, 4 of which are Ktunaxa and 1 is Shuswap. And the college also partners with the Kootenay Regional Office of the Métis Nation of BC.
And I already indicated where TRU is and where I'm from, but today I'm coming to you from Kelowna, which is in the region of the Silks Okanagan people. And I'm really grateful to be here. I'm very privileged to be on sabbatical until July 1st. And so I get to hang out in these beautiful lands. You can see the beautiful lakes in the middle picture there, where I get to hang out till July.
And I'm joining you this morning from Okanagan College, which is on Silk Okanagan, the territory of the Silk Okanagan peoples. And we have 3 campuses that are located on the territory of the Silk Okanagan in Penticton, Kelowna, and Vernon. And also the Salmon Arm campus is located on the traditional and unceded territory of the Secwepemc. And we honor our relations and hold up their knowledge and welcoming all to our House of Learning.
Hey, Now, Maha already invited people to introduce themselves, but we're going to ask you to do it again because some people weren't here. And so we thought we would start with the chatter fall. So we're going to ask you to, I guess, put your name, your role, your title or department, where you're joining from, but don't hit enter. So have it ready in the chat. And if you're willing to share those things, please feel free to put them in there. Your name, your role or title or department, where you're joining from. And then I'm just going to give you a minute. And then when I hit enter, everyone will enter at once and it looks really, really cool. And then you can scroll and see where everybody's joining from. So I'll just give you a minute to do that. So name, role, title, or department, where you're joining from, and I'm going to ask you to hit enter in just a minute. Are folks ready? Close enough? All right, everybody who's ready, hit enter. Wow, wonderful. Amazing. We have people from Cairo and Canada and the UK and every place you can imagine. Amazing. Norway, wonderful. Egypt, again, Cairo, probably. Wow, amazing. Ghana. Wow, thank you for sharing that. That's wonderful. It's lovely to see where people are from. Now, we introduced ourselves as being from particular Indigenous lands. If you are from a place where you have Indigenous lands that you would like to recognize, please feel free to add that in the chat as well. But no obligation to do that. No obligation to do that at all. Okay.
And so I also want to thank everyone as well. So I'll go over the agenda for today. One of the things that we're like to do is consider how academic integrity issues and policies in higher education are often specific to practices and expectations that conform to dominant cultural and epistemological ideologies. However, when we consider which students are often impacted by academic integrity, policies, and expectations, often it's marginalized or underserved students that are impacted. And we're forced to confront our Eurocentric or Westernized notions of knowledge and ownership and information. And so in this session, we have three ideas we'd like to bring up for your consideration. We want folks in this session to consider who are the people who are impacted most by academic integrity. We want to discuss and maybe problematize Western framings of knowledge and knowing and how they influence our concepts of academic integrity in higher education, and referring to concepts explored by scholars such as Sletsnova, Salova, and Takayama. We'll encourage you to consider how these claims we are making about knowledge and knowledge production reinforce power dynamics about ways of knowing and recreate colonial mentalities in our institutions, ourselves, and our learners. Then we're going to highlight Nanwea Pahana's framework on power relations and cultural competencies that she published in 2019 around Indigenous-led assessment. And this highlights two axes of agency and efficacy by which she approaches integrating stakeholder autonomy. And we leverage that as a model to initiate discussions on what a decolonizing approach to academic integrity could look like. And this leads to our conversation about the decolonizing academic framework that will be the focus of our conversation. And so this session will also have some time for sharing ideas and discussions about how we might consider how our institutions or our own or our department's approach to academic integrity participates in colonizing patterns. And we'll take time to consider that as part of how we might decenter those colonial perspectives in academic integrity and move them to a more relational perspective.
Okay, so one of the things that will help us here today in our discussion is to take a minute to consider our positionality within our own institutions. So we've got a Mentimeter poll set up here, And you can join it by following the link that I've just dropped in the chat, or you can use the QR code, or go to dementi.com and enter the code that you'll see on the screen. And one of the things we'd like to know is sort of what's your primary role, and then also what are the things that have brought you here to this conversation about decolonizing academic integrity. So if you can open up the poll, is everybody able to access that?
Yeah, I thought I'd just give people a minute to
Perfect.
get in before I move away from the QR code screen.
Okay.
Let me know when you want me to advance.
Think we should be good.
Yeah.
Everybody's ready?
Oh, excellent. People are already in there filling it in.
Excellent. Perfect. So lots of folks who are faculty members. Great to see, excited to see students and grad students here. Thank you for joining us. Staff members, educational developers. And one of the things that I think you'll see even by this, although the majority of us are faculty, a lot of those conversations around academic integrity at different institutions sit in different places. So in some cases, it's educational developers dealing with these conversations, and other places it might be staff. And the roles that we have play a significant part in thinking about the how we consider the power dynamics involved in these questions. And so maybe we'll go on to the next slide about one of the things that brought us a great number of responses. Thank you. Teaching about knowledge and justice in their role, rethinking academic integrity. This is fantastic. Politics of citation, absolutely. Great research power difference in higher ed, absolutely. Working on the academic integrity committee, overwhelmed with AI, absolutely AI, and probably artificial intelligence as well as a teacher of research writing. Disrupting the dominant ways of framing academic integrity that privilege individualized thinking, absolutely. This is fantastic. Okay, this is great. Concerns about cheating at our institutions, absolutely. Yeah, trained at a high level R1, but have slowly realized how harmful much white male patriarchy influenced this system. And if we think about, if we go back to thinking about, we'll talk about some of these things a little bit later, but if we think about Bourdieu, right, this idea that institutions are there to reproduce themselves, I think that is one of those questions, what is it that we are reproducing? So what, if we can go on to the next slide. Thanks, Carolyn. Thank you, everybody, for all your input. That's really super interesting. I'm so glad you're all here. So why decolonization and what is at stake? And again, thinking about the roles that we play in influencing these conversations and the ways in which we discuss and work to implement strategies around academic integrity and around decolonizing our institutions. So I want to take a step back to talk just briefly about decolonization, and in particular with respect to education, what it is that we're talking about, and what ways does this connect to academic integrity? And perhaps really more important for our conversation here today, how does colonialism manifest itself not only in AI policies and practices, but also in the roles that we play in enforcing them or in acculturating our students to them? And so Marie Baptiste, and you'll see her book here. If you have not read this, it's highly important text. She talks about colonialism being a theory of relationships that's embedded in power, voice, and legitimacy. In Canada, this is a quote from Marie, it has racialized Indigenous people's identity, marginalized and delegitimated their knowledge and languages, and exploited their powerlessness in taking their lands. This imperialistic system of knowledge that's considered mainstream functions like a keeper current in a rapidly furling river or ocean, then the keeper current drags a person to the bottom and then to the top. But if one fights against the current, one usually drowns. Decolonization, she says, then is a process of unpacking the keeper current in education. It's powerful Eurocentric assumptions of education, its narrative of race and difference in curriculum pedagogy, it's establishing culturalism or cultural racism as a justification for the status quo, and the advocacy for Indigenous knowledge as a legitimate education topic. I read that super lengthy quote, and thank you for your patience with that, because I just love that metaphor of the keeper current, right? So dragging us down, and when we fight against it, when students fight against it, when we fight against it, it drags us down, and we only sort of float to the top when we sort of go along with it. Let's go on to the next slide, please. So as we start to talk about plagiarism and academic integrity, the work of the great Sarah Eaton, she observes in her book Plagiarism in Higher Education, for example, that decolonization and indigenization have mostly been absent from any discourse around this. And it's interesting, if you look at a lot of the discourse around how do we help students with academic integrity, those words, acculturation, are often there, right? And it is often about not helping them sort of fight that current, but actually really reinforcing that all the time. So, and she also points to some really interesting work from a number of scholars that I want to acknowledge: Kita Gladue, Yvonne Poitras-Platt, and Gabrielle Lindstrom, whose recent work, and I highly recommend that, and you'll see that in the list of resources at the end, is really helping us to face and unpack sort of the Eurocentric, deeply colonial, racist assumptions that are at the heart of how we tend to conceive of academic integrity. And I'm going to turn it over to Shaun.
Great. So in this slide, we sort of pose the question, who's most impacted by AI policies? And the research on who is impacted is surprisingly thin. Well, it's not really that surprising, but it's unfortunately thin. And much of the research in the past decade has been on attitudes and intentionality and prevention. And data on students who undergo academic integrity discipline cases tend to indicate these first three demographics. And this is especially the case for the first and second year students, who are the least prepared and most vulnerable, and they're least familiar with this ethos around knowledge, knowledge ownership, and citation. And we've also looked at data, or looked for data on proportional representation regarding these students and BIPOC students vis-a-vis their peers. And again, there isn't much of anything in terms of looking at the proportionality of whether BIPOC students are more likely than their white peers to experience AI disciplinary processes. There's one exception to this, Michigan State study in 2016. So other than that, we've not come across anything. And we're unable also to find out information on the demographics of the faculty or the instructors who initiate AI disciplinary procedures. However, there are several studies in the US and Canada on grade schools and secondary schools on higher levels of enforcement and sanctioning of BIPOC students by white instructors. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw the same thing in higher education as well. And so the most recent comprehensive work on this has been Sarah Eaton in her monograph that Paul alluded to. And she points to evidence and shares our suspicions that students from these above populations are indeed more likely to be impacted by misconduct procedures generally, and point to some evidence that correlates to higher levels of academic integrity misconduct being enforced on these demographics rather than their peers. And we should also note that Sarah Eaton also points to the overrepresentation in academic misconduct cases also falls on neurodiverse students and students with learning disabilities. And to sum up at this point, it appears that the evidence indicates that higher at risk and frequently marginalized populations in universities and colleges are more likely to experience harmful impacts from traditional academic misconduct policies and procedures. And we suggest here that colonizing and colonizer attitudes and colonizing norms within our institutions privilege certain populations over others. And so let's further consider the larger context of academic integrity. Can we get the next slide? And so in this slide, there's a lot of information, but we're trying to, in this at this point, give a larger context. So why is there this approach to academic integrity? And in the slide, we talk about modernism and the sort of neoliberal approach of economics and commodification of things that saturates higher education globally. And so the combination of the modernist project approach to knowledge and neoliberal commodifications of knowledge production leads us to ask, how might this impact the framing of academic integrity? And modernism at its core brings with it certain assumptions about knowledge. Knowledge is objective, it's fixed, it's discoverable through reason, and is universally applicable. It treats knowledge almost like a set of commodities, things that can be discovered, owned, passed around, but only if you follow standardized rules. Now, layered this on to the rise of neoliberalism, which is all about market logics, ownership, competition, individual responsibility, and again, commodification. And under neoliberalism, knowledge becomes not just something to possess, but also something to buy, sell, and guard. It becomes intellectual property, a thing that you own and protect like a piece of real estate. And when we bring these ideas into academic integrity, we see students not as participants in a communal process of learning, but as potential violators of property rights. Cheating, plagiarism, and unauthorized collaboration aren't framed as relational breaches. They're treated as theft. Integrity policies then are designed to protect the institution's intellectual property and to discipline those who don't play by these highly individualistic competitive rules. And in this system, surveillance becomes normalized. We monitor students through proctoring software, plagiarism checkers, and increasingly AI detection tools. And when students violate these rules, punishment is framed as necessary to maintain the marketplace of knowledge, rather than an opportunity for relational repair or ethical growth. And the problem here is that this entire structure, modernist and neoliberalism at its core, fundamentally conflicts with indigenous, collectivist, and relational ways of understanding knowledge. And many indigenous frameworks see knowledge as something to be shared. It is relational and it is context bound, and it's evolving. It's not something that can or should be owned in the first place. So when we ask why decolonize academic integrity, it's because the very foundations of how we currently police academic honesty are built on systems that treat knowledge as a commodity, reinforcing colonial capitalist structures that continually marginalize relational, communal, and non-Western ways of knowing. And Solova points to this as leading to epistemicide, where other ways of knowing are marginalized and or culled. And so decolonizing academic integrity invites us to reimagine knowledge not as a product, but to be not a product to be guarded, but as a relationship to be nurtured. It shifts the emphasis from ownership and punishment to relational accountability, trust, and ethical participation in a learning community.
Okay. Well, that leads us to introducing our framework. And before we do that, I want to share with you some of the frameworks that inspired us, this one in particular. And I'm forever grateful to my friend Carolyn Hostler for introducing me to this framework and the woman who created it, Nonwe Apahana. So Nonwe Pahana is a Maori scholar who has created this model for privileging Indigenous needs, perspectives, and voices in decision-making in evaluation processes. And so we do recognize the limits of presenting this framework as a Cartesian graph, but I think you can see how this framework works nonetheless. And so core to her model is how power is shared. The model outlines a decision-making and control continuum based on a series of prepositions. And the prepositions, as you can see, are to, for, with, by, and as. And on one axis, we have decision-making imposed by Western evaluators, all the way to Indigenous self-determination. So Western imposed is decisions are being imposed on a group. Self-determination is decisions are being made by the people being assessed or evaluated. And then on the other axis, we have consequences. The more self-determination there is, the better the results. The less self-determination there is, the more imposition there is, the more harm there is. And so this particular graph puts these prepositions in various places. And so the idea is that evaluation done to, the evaluator retains the control. There's no control and no benefits for the Indigenous community being evaluated or subject to evaluation. Evaluation done for seeks to improve the situation, but there's minimum consultation and it's designed and managed without reference to Indigenous values. Evaluation done with really is that place where control is shared and decision-making is shared and negotiated. It's collaborative and participatory, and multiple worldviews might be involved here. Evaluation done by, we've got now Indigenous control by the communities being evaluated, and their primary Western methods might be involved, but primary would be the Indigenous ways of knowing and being. By the time we get to the Indigenous knowledge and science is just the norm. It only includes Western methods if it's seen as particularly useful, and essentially it's self-evaluation. And so how might this apply to academic integrity? Well, the idea is that academic integrity policies are often created to and for students rather than with and by them, without taking into consideration their understanding or perspectives about knowledge creation or the culture's understanding that they're from, or how they credit holders of information in their own cultures and contexts. And so we look at this framework, and although it was created for one purpose, Nonwe Pahana is actually very much in favor of us using this framework for other forms of power sharing, not just evaluation. So this inspired us to think through, well, what does this actually mean in a classroom setting? What does this actually mean in an institutional setting when we're thinking through academic integrity? And so we were thinking, what if we included perspectives of those impacted in the creation and upholding of those academic integrity policies and procedures? Instead of doing things to the community, what if these policies were co-created and co-negotiated and co-navigated? And if everyone worked towards creating something collaborative that could very much I guess, speak to the places where the students are coming from, they would be more likely to see it as a valuable thing. So the aim for fostering academic integrity work by students in ways that work best for their conditions, values, and contexts will also earn you support from students and investment from students. And the idea is to promote organic rather than prescriptive solutions to academic integrity issues. And so we were inspired by this framework when we created our own framework, which we'll share with you in just a minute. And there's another framework by the Anti-Racist Network in Saskatoon that isn't about education. It's about organizations and moving organizations from deeply colonial spaces to more culturally safe spaces. And so the framework we're about to share with you, we are aware it's aspirational. but we hope it will serve as a lens through which those wishing to decolonize their own policies, procedures, can look at their own institutional policies and procedures and maybe even decide to revise them. And so that really was our goal. And we have presented it a few times and we've been seeking feedback. So if you have feedback for us, we would also be really grateful. We've composed an article around it, have revised it through this process, and the article isn't published yet, but it will be open access when it is. But even then, we're envisioning this as a work in progress. So I think, Shaun, you're going to take people through the framework, and you've just dropped the link in the chat for people to access it to download.
Yep,
Okay,
I sure
perfect.
did. Sorry. And while everyone's looking at the framework, I'm going to walk us through it as quickly as I can. And as Carolyn said, it is aspirational, and we are seeking input because we have found that every time we've presented it, it's been helpful where we've been able to either fine tune it or think about another dimension of the work that we're doing. So this isn't about a quick fix. It's about noticing our current practices and where they sit and imagining where we might want to move. And I'll walk us through the 5 big areas of these frameworks and invite you to reflect on where you are or your own department or your own institution might be. So the first thing is ethos, the spirit or the underlying mindset of the policy. In most colonial versions, academic integrity policies are really about policing. They reinforce a neoliberal settler idea that knowledge is property and that students need to be surveilled to protect it. A little less rigid are systems that try to be more inclusive, but really they still expect students to conform to dominant ways of knowing. Moving closer to equity on the right, some policies recognize that students come from different contexts, but knowledge is still treated like something you own, trade, and guard. And in a more decolonized approach, the ethos is relational. Knowledge is seen as a living, dynamic, shared thing, not something to be hoarded or to defend. In the second dimension, the next dimension is language. And so the colonial policies use legalistic, criminalizing language. It's about violations and sanctions and misconduct. It's very punitive. More inclusive policies frame issues as breaches of honor codes, but it still idealizes a singular Western vision of community. Moving towards equity, we see language start to hint at relational values, but it still assumes a normative understanding of knowledge and attribution. And a more decolonized approach shifts the language entirely. It centers relational accountability, trust, learning, healing, and the restoration of relationships when trust is broken. The third part of this framework, the oversight and stewardship. In colonial structures, we see that as enforcement falls to administrative offices focused on student conduct, usually disconnected from teaching and learning itself. More inclusive models bring in faculty or administrative committees, but often without diverse or student voices. And then moving more towards equity, oversight usually involves academic units with student representation, but still may be reproducing colonizing assumptions. And then in a more decolonized model, oversight belongs to independent bodies that are deeply representative. They're grounded in equity and guided by decolonizing principles. And then thinking about who is responsible for academic integrity, in the colonial view, it's solely the student's burden to comply with corporate style policies. More inclusive policies suggest both students and faculty play a role, but still emphasizing designing authentic assessments to catch misconduct. And as we move closer to equity, responsibility becomes collective, but still operates within capitalistic models of knowledge ownership. And then in a more decolonized model, accountability is shared, it's relational, it's about truth-telling, community learning, and resisting ownership models. It recognizes that knowledge grows through connection and not competition. In terms of the outcomes, colonial outcomes are punitive, they're standardized, they're homogenized, often without little regard for context or learning. More inclusive systems allow case-by-case mercy, but still see punishment as the default. More equity-focused systems use misconduct as a development opportunity, but often still socialize students into this dominant culture. And then finally, in this decolonize framework, there's more outcome focus. The outcomes are focused on restorative justice. They aim to heal harm, restore trust, and encourage ethically grounded knowledge sharing. And so that represents our work. And again, the framework isn't about perfection, it's about direction. So wherever your institution is, the question becomes, what shifts can we make to move closer to relational, anti-oppressive approaches to academic integrity? And it's about reimagining academic integrity, not as a set of rules to enforce, but a set of relationships to nurture.
So I'm really aware this is really hard to read on the screen, so please feel free to go to the link in the chat, and you can blow up that version for yourself or download it if you wish. So what we're hoping you will do with this framework, just for the next few minutes, I don't think we're going to probably do breakout rooms just because we don't have a ton of time, and I think that people can unmute or use the chat. But we want to just give you a few minutes of working time first to look at the framework a little bit and identify your own institution or your personal classroom positionality regarding academic integrity in the framework. And again, maybe just even thinking about your own classroom and your own course outline would be a great starting place. Consider if there's a place you would like to make a change. Is there a way, is there a place in that framework where you might want to take your own policies one step over towards the right? One column over, and then brainstorm some of your ideas for this and then share in the chat. Now we're gonna give you a few minutes to do this, so it will be quiet for just a couple of minutes because we're aware it's a lot of information to take in. So Paul and Shaun, what do you think about 5-6 minutes just to have a look and think about that?
I think 5 minutes would probably be good. And as we go along, people can probably continue to add to the chat.
Yeah. So we'll in 5 minutes we will check in, and in the meantime, please feel free to drop things in the chat. There's so much great stuff in the chat. Wonderful. So Shaun, do you want to chat about some of the stuff in the chat?
Yeah, we can do that. So I'm just reading through it, and it's interesting to see in this conversation how people are thinking about their approaches. And there's several questions here. I just want to let's see here. So Joseph has been asking about knowledge keepers, and Carolyn, I think, has addressed that question in terms of Indigenous folk having this sort of people who carry knowledge forward. And then, yes, there are protocols for sure. But again, I think it's not so much about seconding away as opposed to having that responsibility. And then there's a question here about the difference between knowledge consumption and attribution. So for, I mean, and Paul and Carolyn can jump in on that. But one of the things that I was thinking is that consumption is, again, goes back to the commodification. And then, yes, we have this situation where for what we're approaching or trying to say is that you can attribute as part of that relational, and then there's the expectation that in a course, attribution is there as part of your learning as opposed to acknowledging ownership. And Paul, you had a comment there as well.
Sorry, I was just responding to Stephen had a great,
Okay.
great question in the chat about how do we what do we understand by academic integrity, and what's the purpose of such policies at institutions? And I'm just in the middle of typing a response to that, but I'll say that out loud. That one of the things, I think this is really one of the things we're asking about really in this presentation, and asking us to think through and looking at how those things get defined, and a lot of the ways in which it gets defined at institutions and our policies and procedures falls so solidly in that left-hand column in our framework. And one of the policies that I really like comes from Brandon University in Manitoba in Canada. And they frame academic integrity as a path from which, and they don't talk about violations or offenses. They talk about departures from the path. And so that idea, again, again, we're still thinking about a path that we can sort of agree on, but the role of policies it's much more relational and about helping the community, helping people to get back on that path. Again, that there's also, I guess, implications of like the straight and narrow path, but I think it's much more inclusive and an interesting example of what happens when we start to change language. And I think it's really a good thing to think about when you're looking at your policies, you're looking at your procedures. What kinds of language do we use to talk about academic integrity?
And then I was also going to point to Maha's comment about, and Amani as well, the idea of knowledge as revelation, or the attributions of the history of engagement with, the sayings of the prophet and the sort of conversations around that in the Hadith. And we also have the same thing in Judaism with the Talmud and the sort of rabbinic traditions therein. And so we do have these longer and alternate approaches to knowledge and how that is shared within the community. So very much appreciate this opportunity. And yeah, I think we can definitely stay in afterwards for conversations in the chat later. But we should probably move forward.
Okay.
There we go. One of the questions that we were definitely hearing a lot of right now is what about generative AI, and how does that change this conversation? And I think that there's that opportunity to go back to relationships, and I think that's one of those things that can be so missing in this. And so as we think about decolonized sort of approaches to pedagogy, those are things that can prioritize that relational over the transactional. And there was some interesting discussions earlier in the chat about AI, and I was also thinking about I hope folks have had a chance to read, for example, John Warner's new book about teaching writing and artificial intelligence. But these relationships are things that build community and become powerful motivators for adhering to community values. So the power of community agreements and conversation around what is academic integrity, how does that connect to the use of AI? And I think these are really, really helpful. So a collaborative and a collective approach to develop a shared understanding about generative AI use in your context can also help to foster its ethical use. And I think that that critical AI literacy is so crucial for not only for students but also for faculty and institutions thinking through this. And I see a lot of uncritical adoption of these tools that are quite worrying, I think. But how does that changes the whole dynamics of what we're talking about with AI in some ways. Sarah Eaton has talked about an era of sort of post-plagiarism. So there's all sorts of interesting conversations going around about this. But I think if we go back to that question of conversation and shared ideas with our students and look at the language we use around these things, I think that can help lead to things. A lot of our language about using generative AI falls in that left-hand column again on our matrix there that we've created. I'll turn that over to Shaun now.
I was going to say something first, and
Oh,
Shaun
sure.
was drop maybe a link in the chat as well. So one of the things that Paul just mentioned is that decolonize pedagogy prioritizes the relational over the transactional. And there is a lot of research to show that relationships are one of the biggest deterrents for students, veering from the path of academic integrity. And we at TRU, we've got, as many institutions do, a website that we've created on generative AI. It was mostly created by the learning technology team, but the page on academic integrity and generative AI was created by my unit, and it's a little outdated now because it's a year and a half old, and AI has definitely changed since then. But there's some great information in there from James Lang that really talks about things that you can do to prevent students from, I guess, engaging in behaviors that with regard to academic integrity that you really don't want in your class. And Paul's just dropped the link in the chat, and it's this page here, and some of this is a little outdated, but there is some information here primarily from James Lang about how to, foster student intrinsic motivation, how to value deep learning versus performance in one instance, how to use low stakes assessment to get students not only learning more deeply, but also if there isn't too much weight on one assignment, students are less likely to want to cheat. And then, of course, things about student self-efficacy and peer influence. And all of this comes from community building in the classroom. And there are some strategies on this page that can help you think some of this through. So not AI proof, because let's face it, generative AI, you can cheat on anything using generative AI, a podcast, a video, a paper, anything, right? Because it can replicate anything. But to help students value the kind of learning that only they can get if they engage themselves can be really powerful. And some of the information on that page can certainly help.
Right. And again, thank you for the questions and the comments in the chat. It's been really helpful. And I was looking for, because it's scrolling so fast, one of the things was someone brought up the citational practices as, again, replicating, colonizing, and colonial settlers' approaches to knowledge. And that's something that we hadn't spent a whole lot of time on, but I think that that's certainly another dimension in terms of the work that could be done to engage academic integrity. So with the time that we have, one of the things, again, it's been a very short time, but we would like you to perhaps, let's do another chatterfall, where what's one thing that you might be able to do, or one thing that you're already doing to foster culturally safe academic integrity. So if you could take a couple minutes, a minute or so, to write a response, and then we can share it to everyone at the same time, and then we can kind of go through it as a way to share this material. And as Maha said, this will be made available as well. And also appreciate all the references and other sources that could be followed up on as resources. Very much appreciate that.
And I'll also send the slides, Maha, to you to share if people are interested.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, so if you're ready, go ahead and hit the return button. You see your responses.
Oh, awesome. More links. That's great. More resources. Thank you.
Yeah, Maha, I agree that having that conversation about ethical AI use, and then also with Joseph was talking about that as well. But this idea of creating the sense of trust and identifying the importance of the learning process and actually working towards some sort of skill or attitude or knowledge base, as opposed to getting, quote unquote, the right answer. And Jenny's pointed out the pushing for this change of academic integrity support to reflect on the students' context, and to question things about specific communities. Because again, we see this in AI as being extremely white, extremely male, extremely Western. So that is an issue. And thank you, Heather, for sharing the resource from UWO.
Okay, I think we are out of time. So we'll just end with a huge thank you to everyone for coming out, and our contact information is there, and we'll send the slides to Maha, who will share with anyone who's interested. So if you want to reach out to us, we would love
Thank you.
to.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
so much. Thank you, Shaun, Carolyn, Paul. Thank you to everyone who joined us today.
Thank you, Dr. Maha. Thank you.
People are still talking.
Thank you.
Their reflections on
Thank
the
you,
way.
everyone.
Yes,
Thank you all.
will share the chat. Like 5 different people asked for this. We will share
Thanks
the chat.
for all.
Inshallah.
Thanks so much for coming, and thank you for the amazing resources in the chat and the amazing discussion. Really, really grateful.
Yeah, what a treat to be able to join you all for this. So exciting. Thank you.
So much, everybody. Thanks, Shaun, Carolyn, Paul. I hope you have a good rest of your week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maha. You as well. Thanks so
And
much for this opportunity.
I'll send this to you within 5 minutes. I meant to send it to you in advance and just lost track of time.
No problem. Thank you so much. I'll stop the recording in case someone wants to